Welcome back, everyone. We're glad to have you here with us. Tonight, we're pulling back the curtain on the world's most classified programs, black projects. The aircraft, weapons, and technologies so secret that their very existence is denied by the governments that fund them. And at the center of it all sits Area 51, where the impossible becomes routine and the future takes flight decades before the rest of us even dream of it. What do you believe is hidden in those classified hangars? Is it simply the next generation of military hardware or something that could reshape our understanding of what's possible? You decide. Share your thoughts in the comments. Now, let's step into the shadows where tomorrow's technology is born today. Chapter 1. The Birth of Black Projects. It began with a letter. On August 2nd, 1939, Albert Einstein wrote to President Franklin Roosevelt about the possibility of Nazi Germany developing atomic weapons. That letter would set in motion the most ambitious secret project in human history, and in doing so, create the blueprint for every classified program that followed. Picture yourself in the summer of 1942. The world is at war, and beneath the rolling hills of Tennessee, thousands of workers are building something they cannot name. They pour concrete foundations for structures whose purpose they'll never know. They install equipment they're forbidden to understand. They live in a city that doesn't appear on any map, working for a project that officially doesn't exist. This was Oak Ridge, one of 3 primary sites for the Manhattan Project. Here, in the secrecy and compartmentalization required to split the atom, the modern Black Project was born. The Manhattan Project established rules that would govern classified research for the next 80 years. First, compartmentalization became sacred doctrine. No single person, outside of a handful at the very top, knew the complete picture. Scientists worked on isolated pieces of the puzzle, like archaeologists examining pottery shards without seeing the complete vessel. Engineers built components without knowing their final purpose. Even the workers constructing the facilities were told only what they needed to complete their specific task, creating a workforce that operated in deliberate ignorance. Second, cover stories evolved into elaborate theatrical productions. Oak Ridge was officially a power plant. Los Alamos masqueraded as a rural school for boys. The massive facility at Hanford presented itself as a chemical plant. These weren't just bureaucratic lies. They were carefully constructed alternate realities, complete with false shipping manifests, dummy corporations, and cover identities for key personnel. Every detail was crafted to withstand scrutiny, from utility bills to employee records. Third, physical isolation became a strategic weapon. The most sensitive work happened far from population centers, in places where security could be absolute and where curious eyes were naturally discouraged by geography itself. Remote locations became synonymous with revolutionary technology, their very inaccessibility serving as both protection and camouflage. The Manhattan Project consumed 4% of America's entire industrial capacity during the war. Nearly 130,000 people worked on it directly, with hundreds of thousands more involved in supporting roles. And yet, the secret held. Even Vice President Harry Truman learned about atomic weapons only after Roosevelt's death thrust him into the presidency. This unprecedented success in maintaining operational secrecy became the template for everything that followed. When the war ended and the Cold War began, military planners looked at what the Manhattan Project had accomplished and asked a simple question. If we can build atomic weapons in secret, what else can we develop away from enemy eyes? The answer materialized in new organizations and facilities. The Central Intelligence Agency, created in 1947, needed ways to develop reconnaissance capabilities without alerting potential targets. The newly independent Air Force required testing grounds for revolutionary aircraft designs. The nuclear weapons program itself demanded ongoing research into delivery systems, guidance technology, and defensive measures. Area 51, then known simply as Groom Lake, emerged from this environment in the 1950s. Its selection wasn't random. Military planners had learned from the Manhattan Project that the ideal location for black projects required several key elements: complete isolation from civilian populations, natural barriers that discouraged casual observation, airspace that could be restricted without raising questions, and terrain suitable for whatever kind of testing the project demanded. Groom Lake checked every box. The dry lake bed provided a natural runway larger than most commercial airports. The surrounding mountains created a bowl that concealed activities from distant observers. The Nevada test site already provided legitimate justification for heavy security in the region. And perhaps most importantly, the area was so desolate that restricting access wouldn't displace any significant civilian activity. But the real innovation wasn't geographical, it was psychological. The Manhattan Project had taught planners that secrecy wasn't just about keeping information from enemies. It was about creating a culture where secrets were protected instinctively, where asking the wrong questions was discouraged not by punishment, but by social conditioning that made curiosity itself feel dangerous. Workers at black project facilities learned to compartmentalize their own minds. They developed what researchers would later call learned ignorance, the ability to perform highly technical tasks while avoiding conscious awareness of their larger implications. A machinist might fabricate components with tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch, while never wondering what those components would eventually become. This mental discipline became as important as any security clearance. This psychological conditioning extended beyond workplace boundaries. Families of black project workers learned not to ask about daily activities. Social interactions were carefully managed to avoid accidental disclosures. Even decades after retirement, many workers would reflexively avoid discussing their classified assignments, not because they feared legal consequences, but because the habit of secrecy had become woven into their identity. The transition from wartime emergency to peacetime paranoia required new justifications for extraordinary measures. During World War II, absolute secrecy was obviously necessary. Everyone understood that careless talk could cost lives. But in the Cold War, threats were more abstract. Enemy spies, technological espionage, and the possibility of nuclear surprise attack created a climate where any breakthrough could tip the balance of power. By the late 1950s, when the first revolutionary aircraft began flying over Groom Lake, the template was complete. Future black projects would follow the same pattern: identify a technological gap or opportunity, assemble a team with necessary clearances, isolate them in a secure facility, provide whatever resources they needed, and maintain absolute secrecy until the project was either complete or abandoned. What emerged from this system were capabilities that seemed to defy physics itself: aircraft that could fly higher than any missile could reach, planes invisible to radar, weapons that could strike targets anywhere on Earth, and eventually technologies so advanced that their very existence challenged conventional understanding of what was possible. The Black Project system succeeded because it recognized a fundamental truth about innovation. The most revolutionary breakthroughs often seem impossible until they suddenly become inevitable. By creating spaces where the impossible could be explored without premature disclosure, these programs accelerated technological progress by decades, creating a shadow timeline of human achievement. But they also created something else, a parallel world of classified capabilities, where the future was always arriving years before the rest of us knew to expect it. And at the center of that world sat facilities like Area 51, where tomorrow's impossibilities became today's carefully guarded realities. Chapter 2: Skunk Works and the Culture of Secrecy. Walk into Building 401 at Lockheed's Burbank facility in 1953, and you'd find something extraordinary hiding in plain sight. Behind unmarked doors and beneath fluorescent lights that never seemed bright enough, a small team of engineers was rewriting the rules of what aircraft could do. They called themselves Skunk Works, a name borrowed from a comic strip, but their mission was deadly serious. Build the impossible, build it fast, and tell no one. The man who made it all work was Clarence Leonard Johnson. Though everyone called him Kelly, he stood barely 5 feet 6 inches tall, but his presence filled any room he entered. Kelly had learned something crucial during World War II. While developing the P-80 Shooting Star revolutionary aircraft required revolutionary methods. Traditional bureaucracy, with its layers of approval and committee oversight, was the enemy of innovation. Speed and secrecy, on the other hand, were its greatest allies. Kelly's approach was radical in its simplicity. Take the best people, give them complete freedom, remove every obstacle, and protect them from interference at all costs. He formalized these ideas into what became known as Kelly's 14 Basic Operating Rules, a manifesto that would guide Black project development for decades to come. Rule number 1 established the foundation. The Skunk Works manager must have complete control of his program in all aspects. No committees, no oversight boards, no external interference. Rule number 2 required that strong but small project teams work together with a minimum of bureaucracy. Rule number 3 demanded that the number of people with any connection to the project must be restricted to an absolute minimum. But it was rule number 13 that revealed the heart of Kelly's philosophy. Access by outsiders to the project, and its personnel must be strictly controlled by appropriate security measures. The word appropriate carried weight here. Security wasn't just about keeping secrets from foreign spies, it was about protecting the creative process itself from the corrosive effects of premature disclosure. The first true test of these principles came in 1954 when the Central Intelligence Agency approached Lockheed with an impossible request. They needed an aircraft that could fly higher than any Soviet fighter or missile could reach, carry cameras capable of photographing objects the size of automobiles from an altitude of 13 miles, and they needed it operational within 2 years. Kelly's response was typical. We can do it in 20 months, and we can do it for $22 million, including prototypes and operational aircraft. The proposal shocked CIA officials, not because it was expensive, but because it was so much cheaper than traditional aircraft development programs. The secret was Skunk Works methodology. Instead of building massive test facilities, Kelly's team would use existing resources creatively. Instead of developing new technologies from scratch, they would adapt proven systems in innovative ways. Instead of following military specifications designed by committee, they would build exactly what the mission required and nothing more. The aircraft that emerged from this approach was the U-2, a machine that looked more like a motorized glider than a spy plane. Its wings were so long and thin that they flexed visibly in flight. Its landing gear was so minimal that the plane essentially had to crash land on every return. Its pressurization system was so crude that pilots required full pressure suits for every mission. And yet, the U-2 could do something no other aircraft in the world could do. It could fly at 70,000 feet, far above the reach of Soviet interceptors, and photograph military installations with unprecedented clarity. More importantly, it could do this while remaining completely invisible to radar systems designed to track conventional aircraft. Testing such a revolutionary machine required a special kind of secrecy. The U-2 couldn't fly from conventional airfields where civilian observers might spot its unusual silhouette. It needed a location so remote that test flights could be conducted without attracting attention, yet accessible enough to support a sophisticated development program. Kelly himself selected the site. Flying over the Nevada desert in a small plane, he searched for a place that met his exacting requirements. When he spotted the dry lake bed at Groom Lake, he knew he'd found it. The natural runway was perfect for an aircraft with unconventional landing requirements. The surrounding mountains provided natural concealment, and the area was already restricted due to atomic testing at the nearby Nevada test site. The transformation of Groom Lake from empty desert to operational test facility happened with typical skunk works speed. In just 4 months, construction crews built runways, hangars, fuel storage, and housing for essential personnel. The base had no official name and appeared on no public maps. Workers called it Paradise Ranch, a deliberately ironic reference to its harsh conditions and total isolation. But the real innovation wasn't in the construction, it was in the culture Kelly created there. Skunk Works personnel operated under what he called the buddy system. Engineers worked directly with mechanics. Test pilots talked directly to designers. When problems arose, they were solved immediately by the people who understood them best, not referred up a chain of command for eventual action. This approach created an almost telepathic connection between the aircraft and its creators. When test pilot Tony Levier reported that the U-2 was difficult to land, Kelly didn't schedule a committee meeting to study the problem. He walked out to the hangar, talked to the mechanics, sketched a solution on a piece of paper, and had the modification installed by morning. The security measures at Groom Lake reflected Kelly's understanding that protecting revolutionary technology required more than just fences and guards. Personnel were carefully selected not just for their technical skills, but for their ability to work in complete isolation. Test flights were conducted only at night or during periods of poor visibility. Aircraft were moved into hangars before dawn and didn't emerge until after sunset. Even within the program, information was compartmentalized with surgical precision. Pilots knew how to fly the U-2, but not how its cameras worked. Technicians understood their specific systems, but not the aircraft's overall mission. Only Kelly and a handful of senior personnel saw the complete picture, maintaining operational security through strategic ignorance. This culture of selective secrecy created something unprecedented in aviation history, a machine so advanced that its existence challenged conventional understanding of what was possible, developed and tested in complete obscurity. The U-2's first flight over the Soviet Union in 1956 represented more than just a successful intelligence mission. It proved that Kelly's methods could produce capabilities that seemed to defy the laws of physics. The success of the U-2 program established Groom Lake as America's premier testing ground for impossible aircraft. But more importantly, It validated the Skunk Works approach to black project development. Small teams working in isolation could achieve breakthroughs that massive bureaucratic programs could never match. Secrecy wasn't just about national security. It was about creating the mental space necessary for revolutionary thinking. The principles Kelly Johnson established at Skunk Works became the template for every black project that followed. Speed over bureaucracy, small teams over large committees, results over process, and always, absolute secrecy until the mission was complete. Chapter 3. The A-12 Ox Cart, Mach 3 over the desert. Imagine standing on the tarmac at Groom Lake on a clear morning in 1964, watching something that shouldn't exist taxi toward the runway. The aircraft before you looks like it was designed by beings from another world. Its fuselage stretches 102 feet from nose to tail, yet weighs barely more than a loaded passenger bus. Its skin gleams with a dark, almost liquid sheen that seems to absorb light rather than reflect it, and when those massive engines ignite, the sound they produce is unlike anything ever heard on Earth. This was the A-12 Ox Cart, and it represented the most ambitious leap in aviation technology ever attempted. While the U-2 could fly higher than any interceptor, the Soviets had proven they could still shoot it down. Francis Gary Powers' capture in 1960 had ended the era of slow, high-altitude reconnaissance. The CIA needed something new, something that couldn't just avoid missiles, but could outrun them entirely. Kelly Johnson's response was characteristically bold. We'll build an aircraft that flies at Mach 3.3. It will cruise at 85,000 feet, and it will be completely invisible to radar. The proposal seemed so impossible that even seasoned Skunk Works engineers wondered if their legendary boss had finally asked for too much. The challenges were staggering. No aircraft had ever sustained Mach 3 flight for more than a few minutes. The heat generated by air friction at such speeds would melt conventional aluminum construction. The fuel would boil in the tanks. The crew would be cooked alive in their cockpits. And the structural stresses would tear apart any airframe built with existing materials and methods. Johnson's solution required rethinking every aspect of aircraft design. The A-12 would be built almost entirely of titanium, a metal so exotic that the Soviet Union controlled most of the world's supply. Lockheed had to create an entirely new network of shell companies and foreign intermediaries just to acquire enough raw material, ironically purchasing much of it from the very nation the aircraft was designed to spy upon. Working with titanium presented challenges no aircraft manufacturer had ever faced. The metal couldn't be welded using conventional techniques. It required specialized tools that often wore out after a single use. And it reacted unpredictably with other materials, causing unexpected corrosion and structural failures. Skunk Works engineers had to invent new manufacturing processes for almost every component, essentially creating an entirely new branch of metallurgy. The fuel system posed equally daunting problems. At Mach 3, the aircraft's skin temperature would reach over 600 degrees Fahrenheit. Conventional jet fuel would boil and expand, potentially rupturing the tanks or causing catastrophic engine failure. Johnson's team developed a special fuel called JP7, designed to remain stable at extreme temperatures. But even this exotic mixture required heating before it could be ignited, adding another layer of complexity to an already impossibly complicated machine. Then there was the problem of thermal expansion. At cruise speed, The A-12 would grow nearly a foot longer than it was on the ground. Fuel tanks had to be designed to leak on the runway, only sealing properly when the metal expanded at high temperature. Wings would droop and twist as they heated up. The entire aircraft would change shape during flight, requiring flight controls that could adapt to a constantly morphing airframe. Testing such an aircraft pushed Groom Lake's capabilities to their limits. The dry lake bed runway had to be extended and reinforced to handle the A-12's unique landing requirements. Special fuel storage facilities were built to handle JP-7's exotic properties, and new hangars were constructed with climate control systems capable of protecting the titanium airframe from the harsh desert environment. The test program itself was conducted under unprecedented secrecy. Flights took place only at night or during periods of poor weather when Soviet satellites couldn't observe the base. Pilots wore pressure suits that looked more like space equipment than flight gear, and the aircraft's performance envelope was explored gradually, with each flight pushing slightly further into the unknown realm of sustained hypersonic flight. On its first full-speed flight, the A-12 achieved something no aircraft had ever done before. It sustained Mach 3.2 for over 10 minutes, proving that controlled hypersonic flight was possible, but the achievement came at a cost. The aircraft's skin temperature reached levels that would have destroyed any conventional plane. Fuel leaked continuously until the tanks sealed themselves with thermal expansion, and the pilot endured G-forces and thermal stress that pushed human endurance to its limits. The operational deployment of the A-12 revealed capabilities that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Flying over North Vietnam and North Korea, the aircraft could photograph military installations from altitudes where it was completely invisible to defenders. When surface-to-air missiles were fired, the A-12 simply accelerated, leaving the weapons far behind as they ran out of fuel. Enemy pilots reported seeing only a brief contrail streak across the sky, gone before they could even turn to intercept. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the A-12 program was how completely it remained hidden from public view. For over 30 years, the aircraft's existence was denied by every level of government. Test pilots who flew it were sworn to secrecy for life. Maintenance crews worked under cover identities. Even the aircraft's name was classified, with most personnel referring to it only by its code designation. The secrecy was so complete that when sonic booms from A-12 flights were reported over the western United States, they were officially attributed to natural phenomena or unidentified atmospheric disturbances. Civilian observers who spotted the distinctive contrails were told they had seen weather balloons or experimental rockets. The possibility that they had witnessed the most advanced aircraft ever built was never acknowledged. This level of classification served multiple purposes. Obviously, it protected the aircraft's capabilities from potential enemies, but it also preserved the technological advantages that made the A-12 possible. The titanium fabrication techniques, the specialized fuel systems, and the thermal management solutions represented decades of advancement over anything publicly known. Revealing these capabilities would have provided a roadmap for other nations to develop similar systems. The A-12 program established new standards for black project secrecy that continue to influence classified aircraft development today. It proved that truly revolutionary technology could be developed, tested, and operated in complete invisibility for decades. And it demonstrated that when national security demanded the impossible, American engineers could deliver capabilities that bordered on science fiction. When the program was finally declassified in the 1990s, aviation experts were stunned by what they learned. The A-12 had been operational for years before the first public discussion of hypersonic flight appeared in technical journals. Its thermal management systems were more advanced than anything being developed for the space shuttle, and its stealth characteristics had influenced the design of aircraft that wouldn't fly until decades later. The legacy of the A-12 extends far beyond its impressive performance specifications. It established Groom Lake as the premier testing ground for aircraft that challenged the boundaries of physics itself, creating a culture of secrecy so effective that the most remarkable aviation achievement of the 20th century remained hidden in plain sight. Chapter 4: Have Blue, the Invisible Fighter. Step into the mathematics building at any major university in 1975, and you might find graduate students working on equations that seem purely theoretical. Complex calculations about electromagnetic wave propagation, surface reflection angles, and geometric scattering patterns, abstract problems with no apparent practical application. But at Lockheed Skunk Works, those same mathematical principles were about to revolutionize warfare itself. The concept began with a Soviet scientist named Pyotr Ufimtsev, who published a paper in 1962 exploring how electromagnetic waves interact with geometric surfaces. His work was considered so theoretical that Soviet authorities allowed it to be translated and published in the West, confident it had no military value. They were catastrophically wrong. Lockheed mathematician Denis Overholser read Ufimtsev's paper and recognized something extraordinary. The equations didn't just describe how radar waves scatter off surfaces. They provided a roadmap for designing surfaces that would scatter radar energy away from its source, making an object effectively invisible to detection. The mathematics were complex, but the principle was elegantly simple. Shape mattered more than material. Kelly Johnson's initial reaction was skeptical. The aircraft Overholser's calculations suggested would look like flying origami, all sharp angles and flat panels arranged in configurations that defied every principle of aerodynamic design. Such a machine might be invisible to radar, but it would probably be impossible to fly. Johnson had spent decades creating aircraft that pushed the boundaries of performance. This proposal seemed to abandon performance entirely in favor of invisibility. But the Pentagon was interested. Vietnam had demonstrated the devastating effectiveness of surface-to-air missiles guided by radar. If an aircraft could penetrate enemy airspace without being detected, it could strike targets that were otherwise invulnerable. The potential tactical advantage was enormous, worth pursuing even if the technical challenges seemed insurmountable. The project that emerged was designated Have Blue, and it represented a fundamental departure from traditional aircraft design philosophy. Instead of starting with performance requirements and adding stealth features, the engineers would start with invisibility and then attempt to make the resulting shape fly. It was backwards engineering taken to its logical extreme. The prototype that took shape in Skunk Works' most secure hangar looked like nothing that had ever flown. Its fuselage was composed entirely of flat panels arranged at precise angles calculated to reflect radar energy away from the transmitter. Its wings were triangular, swept back at sharp angles that created a diamond-like planform when viewed from above. Every surface was angled, every edge was sharp, every curve was eliminated in favor of geometric precision. The mathematical principles behind the design were elegant but unforgiving. Each flat panel had to be positioned at exactly the right angle to ensure radar waves would bounce away from their source rather than back toward the transmitting antenna. The entire aircraft became a three-dimensional puzzle where every piece had to fit perfectly or the stealth effect would be compromised. A single misaligned panel could make the aircraft as visible to radar as a conventional fighter. Building such an aircraft required developing entirely new manufacturing techniques. Traditional aircraft construction relied on smooth curves and flowing lines that could be formed using conventional metalworking methods. Have Blue demanded precision-machined flat panels joined at exact angles, with tolerances measured in fractions of degrees. Even the rivets had to be specially designed to avoid creating radar-reflecting discontinuities in the surface. The first test flights at Groom Lake revealed both the promise and the problems of the stealth approach. Radar operators watching the prototype found their screens remained mysteriously blank even when the aircraft passed directly overhead. The stealth effect was so complete that ground controllers had to rely on visual contact and radio communication to track the aircraft's location. From a detection standpoint, Have Blue had achieved the impossible. But flying the angular prototype proved to be a pilot's nightmare. The faceted design created unpredictable airflow patterns that made the aircraft inherently unstable. Without computer-controlled flight systems constantly making corrections, the pilot could lose control in seconds. Even with electronic assistance, flying Have Blue required constant attention and lightning-fast reflexes. It was less like piloting an aircraft than like riding a barely controlled missile. The test program at Area 51 pushed both machine and pilot to their limits. Flights were conducted exclusively at night to avoid visual detection by Soviet satellites. The prototype's angular surfaces were painted in dark colors that absorbed light rather than reflecting it, making the aircraft nearly invisible even to observers on the ground. Pilots reported that flying the machine felt like controlling a flying shadow, present but somehow not quite there. The security surrounding Have Blue exceeded even the extraordinary measures used for previous black projects. The prototype was moved in and out of hangars only during hours of darkness. Ground tests were conducted inside sealed buildings to prevent electromagnetic emissions from escaping, and the test flights themselves were carefully scheduled to avoid times when foreign reconnaissance satellites might be overhead. Local observers occasionally reported strange lights moving silently across the night sky above Groom Lake. The angular prototype, with its dark surfaces and unusual flight characteristics, created sightings that were difficult to explain using conventional aircraft profiles. Some witnesses described diamond-shaped objects that seemed to float rather than fly. Others reported triangular lights that moved in ways that defied aerodynamic logic. These accounts would fuel UFO speculation for decades to come. But the most remarkable aspect of Have Blue wasn't its appearance or its flight characteristics. It was the proof of concept it provided. The mathematical principles that seemed so theoretical in university classrooms had been transformed into operational reality. An aircraft could be made effectively invisible to radar through design alone, without exotic materials or science fiction technology. The key was understanding and applying the physics of electromagnetic scattering. The success of Have Blue led directly to the development of the F-117 Nighthawk, the first operational stealth fighter. The production aircraft refined the angular design philosophy while improving flight characteristics and operational capability. But it retained the fundamental principle proven by the prototype: shape, not material, was the key to radar invisibility. The implications extended far beyond a single aircraft program. If the stealth principle could be applied to fighters, it could also be used for bombers, cruise missiles, and even naval vessels. The entire nature of warfare was about to change, with invisibility becoming as important as firepower or speed. Enemy radar operators would find their screens increasingly empty even as hostile forces approached their targets. The mathematical breakthrough that enabled Have Blue represented more than just a new aircraft design. It demonstrated that theoretical science could be transformed into decisive military advantage through careful application and relentless engineering. The Soviet paper that provided the foundation had been dismissed as academic curiosity. In American hands, it became the key to achieving tactical invisibility. When details of the Have Blue program were finally declassified decades later, aviation experts realized they had witnessed the birth of an entirely new class of aircraft. The angular prototypes that had seemed so alien during their secret test flights at Groom Lake had established principles that would influence aircraft design for generations to come. The age of stealth had begun in the Nevada desert, hidden behind the same walls of secrecy that had concealed the U-2 and the A-12. Chapter 5: Aurora, the Phantom Hypersonic. Picture yourself standing in your backyard in Amarillo, Texas, on a quiet morning in 1991. The sky is clear, the air is still, and then it happens. A sound unlike anything you've ever heard tears across the heavens. Not the familiar roar of a jet engine or the crack of a sonic boom, but something else entirely, a deep, pulsing thunder that seems to shake the earth itself, followed by silence so complete it makes your ears ring. You look up, scanning the empty blue, and see nothing. No aircraft, no contrail, no evidence that anything unusual has occurred. But the sound lingers in your memory, and you find yourself wondering what could produce such an extraordinary acoustic signature. You've just had an encounter with one of the most persistent mysteries in modern aviation history, the phantom aircraft known as Aurora. Aurora exists in the shadowy realm between documented fact and persistent rumor. Unlike the U-2, the A-12, or Have Blue, there are no declassified documents confirming its existence. No official acknowledgements, no retired test pilots sharing their experiences, no museum displays showcasing its revolutionary capabilities. And yet, the evidence for something extraordinary continues to accumulate in the most unexpected places. The story begins in the late 1980s, when aviation analysts noticed something peculiar in Pentagon budget documents. Buried deep in the classified sections of defense spending reports was a line item for something called Aurora, with funding levels that suggested a major aircraft development program. The amounts were staggering billions of dollars allocated to a project that officially didn't exist. When questioned about Aurora, Pentagon officials gave carefully worded denials. There was no aircraft program by that name, they insisted. The budget line referred to administrative reorganization, not hardware development. But the denials were specific enough to leave room for interpretation. Perhaps there was no program called Aurora, but that didn't mean there was no program at all. The acoustic evidence proved even more intriguing than the budget anomalies. Throughout the 1990s, residents across the American Southwest reported hearing the same distinctive sound pattern, a deep, rhythmic pulsing that seemed to originate from directly overhead, even when no aircraft was visible. The reports came from experienced pilots, air traffic controllers, and military personnel who insisted they had never heard anything like it. Seismologists added another piece to the puzzle. Their instruments, designed to detect earthquakes, began recording unusual signatures that seemed to originate in the atmosphere rather than underground. The patterns suggested something moving at extremely high speed, fast enough to generate pressure waves that registered on sensitive seismic equipment. The signatures appeared most frequently over Nevada, California, and the desert Southwest. But perhaps the most compelling evidence came from high-altitude observers. Airline pilots flying at 35,000 feet occasionally reported seeing contrails that defied conventional explanation. Instead of the familiar straight lines left by commercial aircraft, these contrails appeared segmented, like donuts on a rope stretched across the sky. The pattern suggested a propulsion system that operated in pulses rather than providing continuous thrust. Aviation experts recognized the signature immediately pulse detonation engines, a theoretical propulsion concept that could potentially achieve hypersonic speeds by creating a series of controlled explosions. The technology had been studied in research laboratories for decades, but no operational aircraft was known to use such a system. Yet the contrail evidence suggested something was flying regular missions at altitudes and speeds that pushed the boundaries of known technology. The performance envelope implied by these observations was staggering. If Aurora existed, it would be capable of sustained flight at Mach 6 or higher, fast enough to cross the continental United States in less than 30 minutes. At such speeds, the aircraft would be effectively invulnerable to any surface-to-air missile system in existence. It could photograph targets anywhere on Earth and return to base before enemy forces could mount any effective response. Groom Lake figured prominently in Aurora speculation. The base's extended runways and specialized fuel storage facilities suggested it was configured to support aircraft with unusual operational requirements. Construction projects visible in satellite imagery included structures large enough to house hypersonic vehicles and what appeared to be specialized engine test facilities. Most tellingly, the acoustic anomalies were reported most frequently in the area surrounding Area 51. The secrecy surrounding Aurora, if it existed, would represent the ultimate evolution of Black Project methodology. Unlike previous classified aircraft that were eventually acknowledged, Aurora seemed designed to remain hidden indefinitely. The pulse detonation propulsion system would be so revolutionary that revealing its existence could provide enemy nations with decades of research direction. The aircraft's performance capabilities would be so far beyond publicly known technology that confirmation might fundamentally alter international strategic calculations. Witnesses who claimed to have seen Aurora described an aircraft unlike anything in conventional aviation, long and slender, with a triangular or delta wing configuration optimized for hypersonic flight. Its surface appeared to be covered in a dark, heat-resistant coating that absorbed rather than reflected light. The few sightings that occurred during daylight hours suggested an aircraft that seemed to shimmer as it moved, possibly due to the extreme temperatures generated by sustained hypersonic flight. Skeptics argued that the Aurora evidence could be explained by conventional aircraft operating under unusual conditions. Military test flights of known hypersonic research vehicles, atmospheric conditions that distorted normal contrails, or even natural phenomena misinterpreted by untrained observers. They pointed out that extraordinary claims required extraordinary proof, and that acoustic signatures and unusual contrails fell short of definitive evidence. But believers countered with the consistency of the reports and the technical sophistication they implied. The acoustic signatures were too distinctive and too widespread to result from misidentification. The contrail patterns matched theoretical predictions for pulse detonation propulsion too closely to be coincidental, and the budget allocations suggested a program large enough to support operational aircraft development, not just research studies. The Aurora mystery deepened in the late 1990s when the acoustic reports began to decline. Either the aircraft had been retired, its operational profile had changed, or its propulsion system had been modified to reduce its acoustic signature. Some researchers suggested that Aurora had been a limited production prototype designed to validate hypersonic technologies that would be incorporated into future aircraft programs. Whether Aurora ever existed remains one of the most enduring mysteries in modern aviation history. The evidence is tantalizing but inconclusive, suggesting something extraordinary while falling short of definitive proof. The acoustic signatures, the unusual contrails, and the budget anomalies paint a picture of a program that pushed technology far beyond publicly acknowledged limits. If Aurora was real, it represented the ultimate expression of Black Project philosophy, a capability so advanced and so strategically valuable that its very existence had to be protected indefinitely. The aircraft would embody decades of research into hypersonic flight, advanced materials, and exotic propulsion systems, technologies that remain classified even as civilian researchers struggle to duplicate similar achievements. The legacy of Aurora, real or rumored, continues to influence speculation about current Black projects. If such capabilities were achieved in the 1990s, what might be flying over Groom Lake today? What revolutionary technologies are being tested in the Nevada desert while the rest of the world remains unaware of their existence? Chapter 6: Underground Empires. Descend 300 feet beneath the granite peaks of Colorado's Cheyenne Mountain, and you'll find yourself in a world that feels like science fiction made real. Massive blast doors weighing 25 tons, each guard tunnels carved from solid rock. Inside, buildings mounted on enormous springs rest within caverns large enough to house city blocks. The air hums with the constant circulation of filtered atmosphere, and the walls themselves pulse with the vibration of generators that never stop running. This is NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, and it represents just one example of what modern engineering can accomplish when national security demands the impossible. But Cheyenne Mountain is only the beginning. Across the American Southwest, beneath the desert floor and hidden within mountain ranges, lies a network of subterranean facilities that may dwarf anything the public has ever imagined. The logic of underground construction is compelling. Satellite surveillance can photograph surface facilities with resolution measured in inches. Foreign intelligence agencies can monitor electromagnetic emissions, track vehicle movements, and analyze construction patterns to deduce the purpose of classified programs. But underground, activities become invisible to all forms of remote observation. Beneath sufficient rock and earth, even the most sensitive technologies can be developed and tested without fear of detection. The engineering challenges of deep underground construction are staggering. At depths of several hundred feet, the pressure from overlying rock can crush conventional structures. Ventilation systems must move enormous volumes of air through confined spaces while filtering out contaminants and maintaining precise temperature and humidity levels. Power distribution requires redundant systems capable of operating independently for extended periods. And every component must be transported through access tunnels and assembled in spaces where traditional construction equipment cannot operate. But for Black projects requiring absolute secrecy, These challenges are worth overcoming. An underground facility can house aircraft assembly lines, engine test cells, and complete manufacturing operations without any surface signature. Prototypes can be moved from development labs to test areas through sealed tunnels, never exposing them to observation from above. And the most sensitive research can be conducted in environments shielded from electromagnetic surveillance and protected from all forms of infiltration. Area 51's surface facilities, impressive as they are, may represent only a fraction of the base's true capabilities. Geological surveys of the Groom Lake area reveal rock formations ideally suited for large-scale excavation. The volcanic tuff that underlies much of the region can be tunneled relatively easily while providing excellent structural stability. And the area's existing security perimeter would conceal the massive construction projects required to create underground complexes. Witnesses who claim inside knowledge of Area 51's hidden levels describe facilities that stretch for miles beneath the desert floor. Multiple elevator systems provide access to different depth levels, each with increasingly restrictive security protocols. The deepest levels are said to house the most sensitive projects, connected to the surface only by heavily guarded transport systems and communication links. The logistics of underground aircraft development would require revolutionary approaches to manufacturing and testing. Assembly areas would need to be carved from rock with ceiling heights sufficient to accommodate large aircraft. Climate control systems would have to maintain precise environmental conditions for sensitive electronics and exotic materials, and specialized equipment would be required to move completed aircraft to surface facilities for flight testing. Some researchers point to construction activities visible in satellite imagery as evidence of extensive underground development. Large amounts of excavated material appearing near mountain bases, construction of buildings with no apparent purpose, and the installation of ventilation systems far larger than surface facilities would seem to require. These indicators suggest ongoing expansion of subterranean capabilities that dwarf what's visible above ground. The rumored tunnel networks connecting Area 51 to other classified sites represent perhaps the most ambitious aspect of underground empire theories. Deep-bore tunnels could potentially link Nevada test facilities to weapons laboratories in New Mexico, aerospace research centers in California, and command facilities in Colorado. Such a network would allow the rapid movement of personnel, materials, and even completed aircraft between sites without any surface exposure. The technology for such tunneling exists, though its application on the scale, suggested by some theories, would represent an engineering undertaking comparable to the interstate highway system. Nuclear-powered tunnel boring machines, developed for civilian projects like proposed transcontinental cargo tunnels, could potentially excavate passages large enough for high-speed underground transportation. The power requirements and construction costs would be enormous, but the strategic advantages might justify any expense. Underground facilities also offer unique advantages for testing exotic propulsion systems. Engine tests that might generate detectable acoustic or electromagnetic signatures when conducted on the surface could be completely concealed when performed in deep underground chambers. Specialized test cells could be designed to contain and analyze the emissions from revolutionary power sources while preventing any external detection of their operation. The psychological impact of working in extensive underground facilities cannot be underestimated. Personnel describe environments that feel completely disconnected from the outside world, where day and night have no meaning, and the only reference points are artificial lighting and climate control systems. This isolation serves security purposes by making workers psychologically dependent on the facility itself, reducing the likelihood of security breaches or unauthorized disclosures. The financial costs of such underground construction would be staggering. Estimates for deep underground facilities run into the tens of billions of dollars, figures that could only be justified by programs of extraordinary strategic importance. But black project budgets have historically operated outside normal oversight mechanisms, funded through unacknowledged special access programs that are themselves classified. The money exists if the mission demands it. The security implications of extensive underground networks are profound. Facilities that cannot be detected by satellite surveillance or electromagnetic monitoring would provide an enormous advantage in any conflict. Critical research and development could continue even under conditions where surface installations had been compromised or destroyed, and the ability to move assets through hidden transportation networks would make strategic planning extremely difficult for potential adversaries. Environmental considerations also play a crucial role in underground facility design. Deep excavation must account for groundwater flow, geological stability, and the long-term disposal of materials that cannot be allowed to reach the surface. Ventilation systems must prevent the accumulation of dangerous gases while maintaining positive pressure to prevent infiltration. And waste heat from underground operations must be dissipated without creating detectable thermal signatures. The ultimate purpose of these rumored underground empires remains hidden behind layers of classification and speculation. Whether they house advanced aircraft development, exotic technology research, or capabilities that challenge our understanding of physics itself, their existence would represent the most ambitious construction projects in human history, built not for glory or recognition, but for the protection of secrets that their creators believe are too dangerous or too valuable to ever reveal. As we move forward in our exploration of black projects, the question becomes not whether such facilities could exist, but what they might contain. What technologies are so revolutionary that they require burial beneath hundreds of feet of rock? What discoveries are so profound that they must be hidden from the world indefinitely? Chapter 7: Exotic Propulsion Research. Imagine walking into a laboratory where the laws of physics as you understand them seem to bend and twist like reflections in a funhouse mirror. Here, scientists in pristine white coats manipulate electromagnetic fields that pulse with energies measured in gigawatts. Vacuum chambers hum with frequencies that exist at the very edge of human hearing. And on laboratory benches, small devices levitate silently above magnetic fields, defying gravity through principles that classical physics insists should be impossible. This is the world of exotic propulsion research, where the boundary between breakthrough science and science fiction becomes increasingly difficult to distinguish. For decades, classified programs have investigated concepts that challenge our fundamental understanding of space, time, and energy. Some of these investigations have led to revolutionary technologies. Others have led down theoretical dead ends that consumed billions of dollars and decades of research. But all of them share a common thread: the pursuit of propulsion systems that could render conventional aircraft obsolete overnight. The history of exotic propulsion research traces back to the early Cold War, when both American and Soviet scientists began investigating phenomena that seemed to contradict established physical laws. Reports of German research into anti-gravity devices during World War II, though largely discredited, sparked government interest in exploring unconventional propulsion concepts. If such technologies were even theoretically possible, the strategic advantages would be incalculable. The Biefeld-Brown effect, discovered in the 1920s by physicist Thomas Townsend Brown, became one of the first exotic phenomena to receive serious military attention. Brown demonstrated that asymmetric capacitors could produce thrust when subjected to high voltages, seemingly violating Newton's third law of motion. The effect was weak, barely measurable in laboratory conditions, but it suggested that electromagnetic fields might be capable of generating propulsive forces through mechanisms not described by conventional physics. Government research into the Biefeld-Brown effect continued for decades, with classified programs investigating whether the phenomenon could be scaled up to produce useful amounts of thrust. Test facilities were constructed that could generate the extreme voltages required for large-scale experiments. Specialized chambers were built to eliminate atmospheric effects that might confuse the results. And theoretical physicists were tasked with developing mathematical models that could explain how electromagnetic fields might interact with gravitational forces. The results remained inconclusive. While the effect could be reliably reproduced in laboratory conditions, the thrust generated was far too small for practical propulsion applications. Skeptics argued that the observed forces resulted from interactions between charged particles and the surrounding air, not from any fundamental manipulation of gravitational fields. But believers pointed to experiments conducted in vacuum chambers that seemed to show genuine anti-gravity effects, however small. Zero-point energy research represented an even more ambitious investigation into exotic physics. Quantum field theory predicts that empty space itself contains vast amounts of energy, fluctuations in the quantum vacuum that could theoretically be tapped for propulsion or power generation. The energy density suggested by theoretical calculations is staggering enough to power human civilization for millions of years if it could be accessed and controlled. Classified research programs invested enormous resources in attempting to extract energy from the quantum vacuum. Specialized laboratories were constructed with electromagnetic shielding that isolated experiments from external interference. Exotic materials were synthesized that might interact with zero-point fluctuations in detectable ways. And theoretical physicists developed increasingly sophisticated models describing how vacuum energy might be converted into useful work. The Casimir effect, first predicted in 1948 and confirmed experimentally in 1997, provided tantalizing evidence that zero-point energy could indeed produce measurable forces. When two uncharged metal plates are brought extremely close together in a vacuum, they experience an attractive force that can only be explained by the interaction of quantum vacuum fluctuations. The effect is tiny, but it demonstrates that the energy of empty space is not merely theoretical. Military researchers investigated whether the Casimir effect could be scaled up or modified to produce propulsive forces. Experiments were conducted with specially designed metamaterials that might amplify vacuum interactions. Theoretical studies explored whether carefully shaped electromagnetic fields could create asymmetric Casimir forces that would result in net thrust. And classified programs investigated reports of laboratory devices that seemed to generate anomalous forces through unknown interactions with the quantum vacuum. Electromagnetic field manipulation represented a third avenue of exotic propulsion research. Scientists investigated whether powerful magnetic fields could interact with gravitational forces in ways that conventional physics didn't predict. Superconducting electromagnets were constructed that could generate fields thousands of times stronger than Earth's magnetic field. Specialized facilities were built to test whether rotating magnetic fields might produce gravitational effects through mechanisms described by certain interpretations of general relativity. The theoretical foundation for electromagnetic gravitational interactions came from attempts to unify the fundamental forces of physics. If gravity and electromagnetism were different manifestations of the same underlying phenomenon, then sufficiently powerful electromagnetic fields might be capable of manipulating gravitational forces directly. Such manipulation could theoretically allow for the creation of artificial gravity fields, gravity shielding, or even the generation of repulsive gravitational forces. Research into these possibilities required facilities capable of generating electromagnetic fields of unprecedented strength and precision. Superconducting coils were constructed that could produce magnetic fields measured in hundreds of Tesla, far exceeding anything previously achieved. Power systems were developed that could deliver gigawatts of energy in precisely controlled pulses, and measurement systems were created that could detect gravitational anomalies as small as parts per billion. The challenges of exotic propulsion research extended far beyond theoretical physics. Experimental verification required instruments capable of measuring forces and effects at the very limits of detectability. Electromagnetic interference from conventional sources could easily mask genuine exotic effects, and the psychological pressure to find positive results in programs consuming enormous resources created constant risks of experimental bias and wishful thinking. Security considerations added another layer of complexity to exotic propulsion research. If breakthrough technologies were achieved, they would represent military advantages so overwhelming that their secrecy would be paramount. Research facilities had to be isolated not just from public observation, but from foreign intelligence gathering. Personnel required clearances that restricted their ability to publish findings or collaborate with civilian researchers. And experimental results had to be compartmentalized to prevent any single individual from understanding the full scope of the programs. The theoretical implications of successful exotic propulsion research would revolutionize our understanding of physics itself. If anti-gravity effects could be generated artificially, it would suggest that our models of space-time were fundamentally incomplete. If zero-point energy could be extracted and controlled, it would indicate that the quantum vacuum contained accessible energy reserves of cosmic proportions. And if electromagnetic fields could manipulate gravitational forces, it would require a complete revision of our understanding of the relationship between the fundamental forces. The current status of exotic propulsion research remains hidden behind walls of classification that may never be penetrated. If breakthrough technologies have been achieved, they would be among the most closely guarded secrets in history. If such research continues, it would be conducted in facilities so secure that their very existence remains speculative. And if practical exotic propulsion systems have been developed, they might explain some of the most puzzling aspects of unidentified aerial phenomena reported around the world. The line between cutting-edge science and science fiction continues to blur in the realm of exotic propulsion research. What seems impossible today may become routine tomorrow, just as heavier-than-air flight once seemed to violate the laws of physics. The challenge lies in distinguishing between genuine scientific breakthroughs and elaborate theoretical fantasies, between revolutionary discoveries and experimental artifacts. Chapter 8: The Stealth Revolution. Stand in the Smithsonian's Air and Space Museum and gaze up at the angular silhouette of the F-117 Nighthawk suspended from the ceiling. Its faceted surfaces catch the light like a crystalline sculpture, each flat panel positioned at precise angles that seem to defy aerodynamic logic. Now imagine that this revolutionary aircraft, which redefined the nature of air warfare, was actually a compromise, a stepping stone toward even more advanced stealth technologies that would make the Nighthawk look primitive by comparison. The success of Have Blue and its operational descendant, the F-117, proved that radar invisibility was achievable through careful design. But the angular stealth philosophy came with significant limitations. The faceted surfaces that scattered radar energy so effectively also created aerodynamic challenges that reduced performance and increased manufacturing complexity. Every flat panel had to be positioned with mathematical precision, and even small deviations could compromise the stealth effect. Engineers at Northrop Corporation recognized these limitations and began developing a radically different approach to stealth design. Instead of relying on angular surfaces to deflect radar energy, they would create smooth, curved aircraft that absorbed electromagnetic radiation rather than reflecting it. The concept was elegant in its ambition, an aircraft that would be both aerodynamically efficient and electromagnetically invisible. The B-2 Spirit bomber that emerged from this philosophy represented the most ambitious stealth program ever attempted. Its flying wing configuration eliminated the vertical surfaces that created the strongest radar returns on conventional aircraft. Its smooth, curved surfaces were optimized for both airflow and electromagnetic wave management. And its entire structure was impregnated with radar-absorbing materials that converted electromagnetic energy into heat rather than reflecting it back to enemy receivers. The technical challenges of building such an aircraft pushed every aspect of aerospace engineering to its limits. The flying wing configuration required revolutionary flight control systems to maintain stability without conventional tail surfaces. Computer-controlled surfaces made thousands of tiny adjustments per second to keep the aircraft controllable. Without this electronic assistance, the B-2 would have been impossible for any human pilot to fly. The radar-absorbing materials represented an even greater breakthrough than the aircraft's revolutionary shape. Engineers developed composite structures that incorporated conductive fibers arranged in precise patterns. These materials could absorb electromagnetic energy across a wide range of frequencies while maintaining the structural strength required for flight operations. The absorption process converted radar energy into heat, which was then dissipated through carefully designed thermal management systems. Manufacturing the B-2 required inventing entirely new production techniques. The curved surfaces had to be formed with tolerances measured in fractions of millimeters. The radar-absorbing materials required specialized handling to prevent damage that could compromise their electromagnetic properties, and the entire aircraft had to be assembled in climate-controlled facilities that protected the sensitive stealth coatings from contamination. The cost of achieving this level of technological sophistication was staggering. Each B-2 Spirit cost over $2 billion, making it the most expensive aircraft ever built. The program consumed decades of research and development, requiring advances in materials science, manufacturing techniques, and flight control systems that had applications far beyond aviation. The investment represented a massive bet that stealth technology would revolutionize air warfare. Testing the B-2 at Area 51 revealed capabilities that seemed almost supernatural. The aircraft could penetrate heavily defended airspace without triggering enemy radar systems. Air defense networks designed to detect and track conventional bombers, simply couldn't see the flying wing. On radar screens, the B-2 appeared no larger than a bird, despite being one of the largest aircraft ever built. The electromagnetic signature reduction achieved by the B-2 extended beyond simple radar invisibility. The aircraft incorporated features designed to minimize detection across the entire electromagnetic spectrum. Its engines were buried within the wing structure to reduce infrared signatures. Its surfaces were treated with coatings that absorbed rather than reflected visible light. Even its acoustic signature was carefully managed to reduce the distance at which the aircraft could be detected by sound alone. But perhaps the most revolutionary aspect of the B-2 was how it demonstrated that stealth technology could be scaled up from fighters to strategic bombers. The principles proven by Have Blue and the F-117 were not limited to small, single-seat aircraft. Large, complex aircraft carrying substantial payloads could also achieve near invisibility through careful application of stealth design principles. The success of the B-2 program validated a new philosophy of air warfare. Instead of relying on speed, altitude, or defensive systems to survive in hostile airspace, aircraft could achieve protection through invisibility. This paradigm shift influenced the design of every military aircraft that followed, from fighters to transport planes to unmanned vehicles. The revolution in stealth technology also sparked corresponding advances in radar and detection systems. As aircraft became increasingly invisible to conventional radar, new sensing technologies emerged to counter the stealth advantage. Passive radar systems that detect aircraft by analyzing reflected signals from television and radio transmitters began to show promise against stealth aircraft. Infrared detection systems became more sophisticated, capable of tracking the heat signatures that even stealth aircraft cannot completely eliminate. Low-frequency radar systems represented another approach to defeating stealth technology. While stealth aircraft are designed to be invisible to the high-frequency radars used by most air defense systems, their effectiveness decreases against longer wavelength signals. The physics of electromagnetic wave interaction means that stealth shaping becomes less effective as radar frequency decreases, creating potential vulnerabilities that clever adversaries might exploit. The ongoing competition between stealth technology and detection systems created a technological arms race that continues to drive innovation in both fields. Each advance in stealth capability prompts corresponding developments in radar and sensing technology. Each improvement in detection systems requires new approaches to electromagnetic signature reduction. The cycle of action and reaction ensures that both stealth and counter-stealth technologies continue to evolve at a rapid pace. Modern stealth aircraft incorporate lessons learned from decades of operational experience with the F-117 and B-2. The F-22 Raptor and F-35 Lightning II represent the latest evolution of stealth design, combining radar invisibility with supercruise capability and advanced avionics. These aircraft demonstrate that stealth technology has matured from experimental prototype to standard feature of advanced military aircraft. The influence of stealth technology extends beyond traditional aircraft to unmanned systems, missiles, and even naval vessels. Stealth principles are being applied to everything from cruise missiles to submarines, creating a new generation of military systems that operate in the shadows of electromagnetic invisibility. The revolution that began with Have Blue's angular prototype has transformed the entire landscape of military technology. Looking toward the future, stealth technology continues to evolve in directions that seemed impossible just decades ago. Research into metamaterials promises coatings that could make aircraft invisible across even broader electromagnetic spectrums. Active stealth systems that electronically cancel radar returns are moving from theoretical concepts to practical applications. And adaptive camouflage systems that change their electromagnetic properties in real time represent the next frontier in signature management. The stealth revolution that emerged from the black projects of the 1970s and 80s has fundamentally altered the nature of modern warfare. What began as a mathematical curiosity in a Soviet research paper became the foundation for military capabilities that redefine the possible. And in the classified laboratories and test facilities, where tomorrow's stealth technologies are being developed, engineers continue to push the boundaries of invisibility toward limits that we can barely imagine. Chapter 9: Unmanned Frontiers. Picture a control room in the depths of Area 51, circa 1975. Banks of primitive computers line the walls, their green phosphor screens casting an eerie glow across the faces of technicians hunched over control panels. In the center of the room sits a pilot's chair, but it faces not a cockpit window, but a cluster of television monitors displaying grainy black and white imagery from cameras mounted hundreds of miles away. The pilot's hands grip a control stick connected not to flight surfaces, but to radio transmitters, beaming commands across the desert to an aircraft that has no human aboard. This scene, more science fiction than aviation reality at the time, represented the birth of unmanned warfare. Decades before drone strikes became headline news, before Predator missiles changed the nature of conflict, the classified world was already exploring the revolutionary potential of aircraft that could fight and die without risking human pilots. The concept of remotely piloted vehicles emerged from the brutal lessons of the Cold War. High-value reconnaissance missions over Soviet territory had proven catastrophically dangerous for human crews. Francis Gary Powers' capture in 1960 had ended the U-2's invulnerability. The loss of A-12 pilots over North Vietnam demonstrated that even the fastest aircraft could be vulnerable to increasingly sophisticated air defense systems. Military planners needed capabilities that could penetrate hostile airspace without risking the strategic and political consequences of captured aircrew. The early unmanned systems tested at Groom Lake bore little resemblance to the sleek drones of today. They were crude adaptations of existing aircraft, modified with basic autopilot systems and primitive television cameras. The Ryan Model 147, originally designed as a target drone, became one of the first operational unmanned reconnaissance aircraft. Its bulbous nose housed cameras that could photograph enemy installations from altitudes where human pilots would require pressurized cockpits and life support systems. The technical challenges of remote flight control in the 1970s were staggering. Radio communications had limited range and could be jammed by enemy signals. Television cameras provided poor resolution imagery that made navigation difficult in anything but perfect weather conditions. And the primitive computer systems available at the time lacked the processing power to handle complex flight control algorithms or autonomous decision-making. Yet these early experiments proved that unmanned flight was not only possible but potentially revolutionary. Drones could be designed for missions too dangerous for human pilots. They could carry sensors into environments where life support systems would be impossible to maintain, and perhaps most importantly, they could be considered expendable in ways that aircraft with human crews never could. The evolution from remotely piloted vehicles to truly autonomous systems represented a quantum leap in complexity. Early drones required constant human control, with ground-based pilots making every navigation decision and flight control input. But advances in computer technology during the 1980s and 90s made it possible to develop aircraft capable of independent operation for extended periods. The first autonomous flight systems, tested at Area 51, incorporated revolutionary artificial intelligence concepts that wouldn't become publicly known for decades. Neural networks, genetic algorithms, and machine learning protocols were embedded in flight control computers that could adapt to changing conditions without human intervention. These systems could navigate complex flight paths, avoid obstacles, and even modify their mission parameters in response to unexpected situations. The implications of truly autonomous weapons systems raised profound ethical questions that military planners struggled to address. An aircraft capable of selecting and engaging targets without human authorization represented a fundamental shift in the nature of warfare. The decision to take human life, traditionally reserved for human judgment, was being delegated to computer algorithms and sensor systems. Testing autonomous weapons systems required extreme secrecy, not just to protect technological capabilities, but to avoid the political and ethical controversies that such systems would inevitably generate. Public awareness of fully autonomous military aircraft would raise questions about accountability, decision-making authority, and the role of human judgment in life and death situations. These concerns were deemed too sensitive for public debate while the technologies were still under development. The restricted airspace above Nevada provided an ideal testing ground for increasingly sophisticated unmanned systems. Complex scenarios could be programmed that tested autonomous decision-making under various conditions. Simulated combat situations allowed engineers to evaluate how artificial intelligence systems would respond to unexpected threats or rapidly changing tactical situations. And the complete isolation of the test environment ensured that failures or accidents would remain hidden from public scrutiny. Some of the most advanced unmanned systems tested during this period incorporated capabilities that seemed decades ahead of their time. Swarm intelligence protocols allowed multiple drones to coordinate their actions without central control. Adaptive camouflage systems could change an aircraft's visual and electromagnetic signatures in real time. And revolutionary propulsion systems enabled flight characteristics that defied conventional understanding of aerodynamics. The psychological impact of unmanned warfare on military personnel proved as significant as the technological challenges. Pilots accustomed to the visceral experience of flight found themselves operating through television screens and computer interfaces. The traditional connection between warrior and weapon was severed, replaced by a sterile, video game-like interaction that removed operators from the immediate consequences of their actions. Training programs for unmanned system operators had to address entirely new categories of stress and performance challenges. Remote operators could suffer from decision fatigue after hours of monitoring multiple video feeds and sensor displays. The disconnect between action and consequence could lead to both reckless decision-making and paralyzing hesitation, and the ability to pause, replay, or analyze combat footage created psychological burdens that traditional pilots never experienced. The operational capabilities of advanced unmanned systems tested at classified facilities far exceeded anything publicly acknowledged for decades. Autonomous aircraft could conduct surveillance missions lasting days or weeks without human intervention. Swarms of coordinated drones could overwhelm air defense systems through sheer numbers and unpredictable behavior patterns. And artificial intelligence systems could process intelligence data and select targets faster than any human analyst. The secrecy surrounding unmanned warfare development served multiple purposes beyond protecting specific technologies. Military planners recognized that public awareness of fully autonomous weapons systems would generate intense political opposition. Religious and ethical objections to machines making life and death decisions could derail promising research programs. And international efforts to ban or restrict autonomous weapons could eliminate tactical advantages that required decades to develop. The gradual introduction of unmanned systems into public awareness followed carefully managed disclosure strategies. Early acknowledgements focused on reconnaissance and surveillance capabilities, avoiding discussion of autonomous weapons functions. Publicized drone operations emphasized human control and oversight, even when the actual systems were capable of independent operation. And the most advanced capabilities remained classified, appearing only in heavily sanitized budget documents and congressional briefings. The transformation of warfare through unmanned systems represents one of the most profound changes in military history. The ability to project force without risking human personnel has altered strategic calculations in ways that are still being understood. Traditional concepts of deterrence, escalation, and proportional response become complicated when one side can engage in conflict without fear of human casualties on their own forces. The unmanned revolution that began in the classified world of black projects has already transformed modern conflict in ways that were unimaginable just decades ago. As these technologies continue to evolve in the shadows of classification, the next generation of autonomous systems may represent capabilities that blur the line between human and machine decision-making in ways that will define the future of warfare itself. Chapter 10: Energy Weapons and Directed Energy. Enter a laboratory deep within a classified facility, where the air itself seems to crackle with invisible energy. Banks of capacitors line the walls, humming with stored electrical potential measured in megajoules. In the center of the room, a device that looks more like a telescope than a weapon tracks across its mounting, following computer-calculated targeting solutions. When it fires, there is no explosion, no projectile, no visible indication of its operation, except for a brief shimmer in the air and the acrid smell of ozone. Yet hundreds of meters away, a steel target begins to glow cherry red, then white hot, before melting into slag. This is the world of directed energy weapons, where the fundamental forces of physics become instruments of warfare. For over 4 decades, classified research programs have pursued the dream of energy weapons that could strike targets at the speed of light, penetrate any armor, and engage multiple threats simultaneously. The journey from laboratory curiosity to battlefield reality has consumed billions of dollars and challenged every assumption about what constitutes practical military technology. The theoretical foundation for energy weapons traces back to Albert Einstein's work on stimulated emission, published in 1917. But it wasn't until 1960 that Theodore Maiman demonstrated the first working laser, proving that coherent light could be generated and controlled. Military planners immediately recognized the potential applications. A weapon that traveled at light speed could engage targets before they could react. A beam that lost no energy to gravity or air resistance could strike with unprecedented precision, and a system with no ammunition could fire continuously as long as power was available. The first military laser research began in the early 1960s, when classified programs investigated whether existing laser technology could be scaled up for weapons applications. Early experiments focused on ruby lasers and gas dynamic systems that could generate modest amounts of coherent light. These primitive devices could burn holes in thin metal sheets or blind optical sensors, but they were far from the devastating energy weapons that science fiction had promised. The technical challenges of creating practical energy weapons proved staggering. Laser systems required enormous amounts of electrical power, far more than could be generated by portable systems. The waste heat produced by inefficient laser operations could destroy the weapons themselves within seconds. And the atmospheric absorption and scattering that affected all electromagnetic radiation limited the effective range of even the most powerful laser systems. Chemical laser systems represented the first major breakthrough in weapons-grade directed energy. By using chemical reactions to directly generate excited states in lacing media, these systems could achieve power levels that electrical systems couldn't match. The miracle laser, tested at classified facilities in the 1980s, could generate continuous power in the megawatt range, enough to destroy incoming missiles or disable enemy satellites. But chemical lasers came with their own limitations. The toxic chemicals required for operation made them dangerous to handle and difficult to maintain. The chemical reactions that powered them were difficult to control precisely, making accurate targeting challenging, and the waste products of the chemical process created logistical problems that limited their operational utility. Particle beam research represented an even more ambitious approach to directed energy weapons. Instead of using coherent light, these systems would accelerate charged particles to near-light speeds and focus them into devastating beams. The theoretical advantages were compelling. Particle beams could penetrate atmospheric interference that stopped laser systems. They could deliver far more energy to targets than any chemical laser. And they could create electromagnetic pulse effects that would disable electronic systems over wide areas. The particle beam experiments conducted at classified facilities pushed the boundaries of physics and engineering. Massive accelerator systems were constructed that could generate particle beams with energies measured in giga-electron volts. Superconducting magnets weighing hundreds of tons focused these beams with precision measured in micrometers. And specialized target chambers allowed researchers to study the effects of particle beam impacts under controlled conditions. The results were both promising and problematic. Particle beams could indeed deliver devastating amounts of energy to targets, vaporizing steel plates and creating plasma effects that seemed almost supernatural. But the accelerator systems required to generate useful beams were enormous, consuming building-sized facilities and requiring cooling systems that could handle waste heat measured in megawatts. The prospect of creating battlefield portable particle beam weapons seemed increasingly remote. High-power microwave systems offered a third approach to directed energy warfare. These weapons used focused radio frequency energy to disable electronic systems without necessarily destroying their physical components. The concept was elegant in its simplicity. Nearly all modern military systems depend on electronic components that are vulnerable to electromagnetic interference. A weapon that could generate intense microwave pulses could potentially disable enemy equipment without causing permanent damage or civilian casualties. Microwave weapon research revealed capabilities that bordered on science fiction. Prototype systems could disable automobile engines from distances of several kilometers. Aircraft electronics could be disrupted, causing navigation systems to fail and communication equipment to shut down. And computer networks could be attacked through electromagnetic pulses that penetrated building walls and equipment shielding. The electromagnetic pulse effects of nuclear weapons had demonstrated the vulnerability of electronic systems to intense radio frequency energy. But creating equivalent effects through non-nuclear means required revolutionary advances in power generation and antenna design. Researchers developed explosive-powered generators that could produce gigawatt pulses of microwave energy. Specialized antennas were created that could focus this energy into beams narrow enough for precise targeting. The operational implications of successful directed energy weapons would revolutionize warfare in ways that conventional weapons never could. Energy weapons could engage targets at light speed, eliminating the time delays that allowed enemy systems to react or take evasive action. They could fire continuously without running out of ammunition, limited only by available power and cooling capacity. And they could be precisely controlled, allowing for graduated responses that ranged from temporary disruption to complete destruction. But the development challenges proved more complex than early optimists had anticipated. Power generation systems capable of feeding energy weapons required breakthrough advances in electrical engineering. Cooling systems had to dissipate waste heat that could melt conventional materials, and targeting systems had to compensate for atmospheric effects that could scatter or absorb directed energy beams. The secrecy surrounding energy weapon development served multiple purposes beyond protecting specific technologies. Military planners recognized that successful energy weapons would provide such overwhelming tactical advantages that potential enemies would invest enormous resources in developing countermeasures. Revealing the true capabilities of operational energy weapons could trigger arms races that would eliminate the technological advantages that had taken decades to achieve. International legal considerations also influenced the classification of energy weapon research. Weapons that could blind enemy personnel raised questions about compliance with international laws governing warfare. Systems capable of disabling civilian infrastructure could be considered disproportionate responses to military threats. And the potential for energy weapons to cause environmental damage through atmospheric heating or ozone depletion created regulatory concerns that military planners preferred to avoid. The gradual acknowledgement of energy weapon capabilities followed carefully managed disclosure strategies similar to those used for stealth aircraft and unmanned systems. Early public demonstrations focused on defensive applications, such as missile defense systems that could destroy incoming threats. Offensive capabilities were downplayed or denied entirely, even when operational systems were being deployed. And the most advanced energy weapon technologies remained hidden behind classification barriers that showed no signs of being lowered. Current energy weapon systems likely represent capabilities that would seem impossible to observers familiar only with publicly acknowledged technology. The energy weapon revolution that began in classified laboratories decades ago continues to unfold behind walls of secrecy that may never be completely penetrated. The fundamental physics that enables these systems is well understood, but the engineering solutions that make them practical remain among the most closely guarded secrets in the military arsenal. Chapter 11: Material Science Mysteries. Walk into a specialized laboratory where materials that shouldn't exist according to conventional physics sit quietly on examination tables. Here, sheets of metal bend and twist like rubber, then snap back to their original shape with perfect precision. Composite panels absorb electromagnetic radiation across frequencies that span from radio waves to visible light, converting energy into heat so efficiently they seem to swallow light itself. And in sealed chambers, substances exhibit properties that challenge fundamental assumptions about how matter behaves under normal conditions. This is the hidden world of exotic materials research, where the boundaries between chemistry, physics, and engineering dissolve into investigations that push matter itself beyond its known limits. For decades, classified programs have developed substances with capabilities that would have been dismissed as impossible just generations ago. These materials enable technologies that depend not just on advanced design, but on the fundamental properties of matter itself. The history of exotic materials research in black projects traces back to the late 1940s, when metallurgists studying debris from classified incidents began encountering substances that defied conventional analysis. These materials exhibited properties that existing scientific models couldn't explain. Some showed shape memory effects that went far beyond anything previously observed. Others demonstrated electromagnetic characteristics that seemed to violate basic principles of materials science. Memory metals represent one of the most thoroughly documented examples of materials that bridge the gap between conventional science and seemingly impossible properties. Nitinol, a nickel-titanium alloy discovered in the late 1950s, can be deformed into complex shapes and then returned to its original configuration when heated. The effect is so dramatic that twisted metal can unfold like a flower blooming in fast forward, driven by molecular forces that remember their preferred atomic arrangements. But the memory metals developed in classified programs allegedly go far beyond commercial nitinol in their capabilities. Some materials reportedly exhibit multiple memory states, able to cycle between different predetermined shapes in response to various stimuli. Others demonstrate memory effects that persist for decades without degradation, maintaining their programmed configurations through temperature cycles that would destroy conventional materials. The applications of advanced memory metals in aerospace technology are profound. Aircraft structures that could change shape in flight, adapting their aerodynamic properties to different mission requirements. Antenna systems that could reconfigure themselves for optimal signal reception across multiple frequency bands. And deployment mechanisms for space-based systems that could unfold complex structures from compact packages with perfect reliability. Metamaterials represent an even more revolutionary approach to materials engineering. These substances derive their properties not from their chemical composition, but from their precisely engineered structure at scales smaller than the wavelengths of electromagnetic radiation. By arranging conventional materials in specific patterns, engineers can create substances with electromagnetic properties that don't exist in nature. The electromagnetic properties achievable through metamaterial engineering seem to violate intuitive understanding of how materials interact with radiation. Negative refractive index materials can bend light in directions that conventional optics considers impossible. Electromagnetic cloaking materials can guide radiation around objects, making them effectively invisible to specific frequencies. And perfect absorber materials can eliminate reflection and transmission across broad electromagnetic spectrums. Military applications of metamaterials extend far beyond simple stealth technology. Perfect electromagnetic absorbers could create materials that are completely invisible to radar across multiple frequency bands simultaneously. Tunable metamaterials could change their electromagnetic properties in real time, allowing single surfaces to provide different types of camouflage as needed. And negative index materials could enable optical systems with capabilities that challenge fundamental assumptions about the limits of imaging and sensing technology. The manufacturing challenges of exotic metamaterials require precision that pushes fabrication technology to its absolute limits. Structural features must be controlled at nanometer scales across materials that span meters in dimension. Chemical composition must be maintained with atomic-level precision to ensure electromagnetic properties remain stable. And assembly processes must account for quantum mechanical effects that become significant at the scales where metamaterial properties emerge. Some of the most intriguing materials research involves substances that exhibit properties that seem to contradict established physics. Room temperature superconductors that could revolutionize power transmission and electromagnetic field generation. Materials with negative mass characteristics that could enable revolutionary propulsion systems. And substances that demonstrate quantum mechanical effects at macroscopic scales, allowing for applications that bridge the gap between quantum physics and engineering reality. The connection between exotic materials research and analysis of unexplained debris has been a subject of persistent speculation. When unusual materials are recovered from incidents that resist conventional explanation, they become subjects for the most advanced analytical techniques available to classified research programs. These investigations can reveal properties that suggest manufacturing techniques beyond current human capabilities or material configurations that shouldn't be stable under normal conditions. Analysis of exotic debris requires specialized facilities designed to handle materials with unknown properties. Containment systems must account for the possibility that unusual materials might exhibit unexpected behaviors when subjected to analysis. Testing protocols must be developed that can characterize properties without damaging samples that might be irreplaceable. And safety measures must protect researchers from materials that might interact with biological systems in ways that conventional materials do not. The secrecy surrounding exotic materials research serves multiple strategic purposes. Materials with revolutionary properties could provide decisive military advantages that would be lost if their capabilities became widely known. Manufacturing techniques that enable impossible materials represent technological advantages that could take decades for adversaries to duplicate. And the basic scientific principles that govern exotic material properties might lead to applications that extend far beyond military technology. International implications of breakthrough materials. Discoveries add another layer to classification requirements. Materials that enable revolutionary energy storage could destabilize entire economic sectors. Substances that provide perfect electromagnetic shielding could render existing communication systems obsolete. And manufacturing techniques that allow atomic-level control of material properties could fundamentally alter the competitive balance between nations. The trickle-down effects of classified materials research occasionally appear in civilian applications, though often decades after their initial development. Advanced carbon fiber composites, rare earth magnetic materials, and specialized ceramic compounds frequently trace their origins to classified research programs. But the most revolutionary materials discoveries likely remain hidden behind classification barriers that show no signs of being lowered. Current materials research in classified programs probably involves capabilities that would seem like magic to observers familiar only with commercially available substances. Programmable matter that can reconfigure itself into different shapes and functions, materials that can repair themselves when damaged, maintaining their properties indefinitely, and substances that can manipulate fundamental forces in ways that enable entirely new categories of technology. The computational requirements for designing exotic materials with predetermined properties push the limits of available processing power. Quantum mechanical calculations that describe material behavior at atomic scales require supercomputers operating for months to model even simple systems. Machine learning algorithms trained on vast databases of material properties search for combinations that might exhibit desired characteristics. And artificial intelligence systems explore design spaces that human researchers could never investigate manually. The materials science revolution hidden within classified programs represents one of the most profound technological advances of the modern era. These substances enable the impossible aircraft, invisible weapons, and revolutionary sensors that define advanced military capabilities. As research continues in the shadows of classification, the next generation of exotic materials may challenge our most fundamental assumptions about the nature of matter itself. Chapter 12: Biological and Chemical Secrets. Step into a sterile laboratory where the boundaries between medicine and warfare blur beyond recognition. Here, researchers in protective suits work with substances that exist at the intersection of healing and harm. Vials contain compounds that could enhance human performance beyond natural limits or incapacitate enemies without permanent injury. Charts on the walls map neural pathways that govern memory, perception, and decision-making. And locked cabinets hold the results of experiments that pushed the limits of medical ethics in pursuit of military advantages that couldn't be achieved through conventional means. This is the most controversial frontier of Black Project research, where the quest for military superiority led scientists into territories that challenged fundamental assumptions about the sanctity of human biology and the ethics of scientific inquiry. For decades, classified programs explored applications of biological and chemical science that ranged from performance enhancement to interrogation techniques, often operating in moral grey areas that left lasting questions about the price of national security. The roots of biological and chemical research in classified programs trace back to World War II, when reports of German and Japanese experiments with chemical agents and biological weapons sparked urgent defensive research efforts. The discovery of Nazi concentration camp experiments and Japanese Unit 731 activities revealed the horrific potential of science divorced from ethical constraints. Allied researchers found themselves studying these brutal findings while struggling to develop countermeasures without crossing the same moral boundaries. The Cold War intensified interest in biological and chemical capabilities as intelligence agencies sought methods for covert operations that left no physical evidence. Traditional weapons were too obvious for many intelligence missions. Conventional poisons could be detected through autopsy, but substances that could temporarily incapacitate, confuse, or control human behavior offered possibilities for operations that could be conducted without leaving traces that could be definitively attributed to hostile action. Project MK-Ultra, operated by the Central Intelligence Agency from the 1950s through the 1970s, represents the most extensively documented example of biological and chemical research conducted under Black Project secrecy. The program investigated the use of psychoactive drugs, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, and psychological manipulation for interrogation and mind control purposes. The experiments were conducted on unwitting subjects, often patients in mental hospitals or prisoners who had no knowledge of their participation in classified research. The chemical compounds studied in these programs included substances that would later become known as recreational drugs, but were initially investigated for their potential military applications. LSD was examined as a possible interrogation aid that could break down psychological resistance to questioning. Barbiturates were tested as truth serums that might compel subjects to reveal classified information, and experimental stimulants were evaluated for their potential to enhance soldier performance in combat situations. The results of these experiments revealed capabilities that were both promising and deeply troubling. Chemical agents could indeed alter consciousness, modify behavior, and reduce psychological resistance to suggestion. But the effects were unpredictable, often dangerous, and impossible to control with the precision required for reliable operational use. Subjects sometimes experienced permanent psychological damage, and the ethical implications of involuntary chemical manipulation raised questions that program administrators were reluctant to address. Performance enhancement research represented another major area of biological investigation within classified programs. Military planners had long sought methods to improve soldier capabilities beyond natural human limits. Chemical stimulants could increase alertness and reduce fatigue during extended operations. Experimental drugs could enhance physical strength and endurance, and specialized compounds could improve reaction times and cognitive function under stress. The development of performance-enhancing substances required extensive human testing that pushed the boundaries of medical ethics. Volunteer subjects, often military personnel seeking career advancement, were exposed to experimental compounds with unknown long-term effects. Some substances showed promising short-term benefits, but caused health problems that only became apparent years after exposure. Others produced dramatic performance improvements that came with psychological side effects that made them unsuitable for operational use. Research into biological weapons represented the darkest aspect of classified biological research. International treaties banned the development of biological agents for offensive purposes, but defensive research remained legal and often indistinguishable from weapons development. Scientists studied pathogens that could be weaponized, developed detection methods for biological attacks, and created protective equipment for military personnel operating in contaminated environments. The dual-use nature of biological research created ethical dilemmas that researchers and administrators struggled to resolve. Vaccines developed to protect American forces could also serve as proof of concept for biological weapons targeting specific genetic populations. Detection systems designed to identify enemy biological attacks could be reverse engineered to optimize the deployment of such weapons. And containment protocols developed for defensive purposes could be adapted to control the spread of deliberately released pathogens. The secrecy surrounding biological and chemical research served multiple purposes beyond protecting specific capabilities. Public awareness of these programs would generate intense political opposition from groups concerned about medical ethics and human rights. International disclosure could violate treaty obligations that banned certain types of biological and chemical weapons research. And revelation of experimental results could provide enemy nations with research directions that would accelerate their own weapons development programs. Congressional investigations in the 1970s revealed the extent of unethical experimentation conducted under the cover of national security classification. Hearings documented cases of involuntary drug administration, experimental surgery, and psychological manipulation conducted without informed consent. The revelations led to stricter oversight of human experimentation and the establishment of ethical review boards for all government-sponsored medical research. But the fundamental tensions between military necessity and medical ethics continue to influence classified research programs. The development of countermeasures for biological and chemical weapons requires some level of offensive research to understand the threats being addressed. Performance enhancement research pushes the boundaries of safe human experimentation in pursuit of military advantages, and the secrecy required to protect these programs makes independent ethical oversight extremely difficult. Current biological and chemical research in classified programs likely focuses on applications that would have seemed impossible just decades ago. Genetic engineering techniques that could enhance human performance or create resistance to specific biological agents. Nanotechnology applications that could deliver drugs or toxins with unprecedented precision. And neuroscience research that could provide insights into consciousness, memory, and decision-making processes that govern human behavior. The convergence of biotechnology, artificial intelligence, and nanotechnology creates possibilities for biological manipulation that dwarf anything attempted in previous decades. Targeted genetic modifications could enhance specific capabilities while leaving other functions unchanged. Neural interfaces could allow direct chemical or electrical manipulation of brain function. And synthetic biology could create entirely artificial organisms designed for specific military or intelligence applications. The ethical implications of these advanced capabilities extend far beyond traditional concerns about human experimentation. The potential for genetic modifications that could be passed to future generations raises questions about the long-term impact of military enhancement programs. Neural manipulation technologies could fundamentally alter concepts of free will and personal autonomy, and synthetic biological agents could create environmental hazards that persist long after their intended military applications have ended. The legacy of biological and chemical research in black projects serves as a cautionary reminder that scientific capability alone is insufficient justification for research programs that affect human health and welfare. The pursuit of military advantages through biological manipulation has repeatedly led researchers into territories where the potential benefits were outweighed by ethical costs that became apparent only in hindsight. As these technologies continue to evolve in the shadows of classification, the challenge remains to balance legitimate security needs with fundamental ethical principles that protect human dignity and welfare. The capabilities being developed today may represent tools that could reshape human nature itself, making the ethical considerations more profound than any previous generation of weapons or military technologies. Chapter 13: Digital Warfare and Cyber Secrets. Picture a room where warfare is conducted not with missiles or bullets, but with streams of data flowing through fiber optic cables at the speed of light. Here, soldiers, armed with keyboards, wage battles across networks that span continents. Their weapons, consisting of carefully crafted code designed to penetrate, disrupt, and destroy systems that their enemies depend upon for everything from power generation to financial transactions. The battlefield is invisible, existing only in the electromagnetic spectrum, but the consequences are as real as any conventional explosion. This is the domain of cyber warfare, where the most devastating attacks leave no physical evidence and the most sophisticated weapons are composed entirely of information. For decades, classified programs have developed capabilities that transform computer networks from tools of communication and commerce into instruments of strategic warfare. The evolution of these digital weapons has paralleled the growth of global connectivity, creating vulnerabilities that their creators never anticipated. The origins of digital warfare trace back to the earliest days of computer networking, when military researchers recognized that information systems could be targeted just as effectively as physical infrastructure. The Advanced Research Projects Agency network, developed in the late 1960s to enable communication between research institutions, became the foundation for what would eventually become the global internet. But its military origins embedded vulnerabilities that would later be exploited by the same agencies that created them. Early cyber warfare capabilities focused on relatively simple intrusion techniques designed to penetrate enemy computer systems and gather intelligence. Password cracking programs could systematically test thousands of combinations until they found valid credentials. Network scanning tools could map the structure of target systems, identifying potential entry points for more sophisticated attacks. And data extraction utilities could locate and copy sensitive files without leaving obvious traces of their presence. But as computer networks became more central to military and civilian infrastructure, cyber warfare evolved from intelligence gathering to active sabotage. The concept of logic bombs emerged malicious code designed to lie dormant within target systems until triggered by specific conditions. These digital weapons could be planted years before their intended use, activated remotely when strategic circumstances demanded their deployment. The development of sophisticated cyber weapons required understanding not just computer programming, but the psychological and operational patterns of target organizations. Social engineering techniques could manipulate personnel into revealing passwords or installing malicious software. Phishing attacks could impersonate trusted sources to gain access to sensitive systems. And human factors exploitation could turn the weakest link in any security system, the people who operated it, into unwitting accomplices. Stuxnet, revealed to the public in 2010, demonstrated capabilities that redefined the scope of cyber warfare. This sophisticated malware specifically targeted industrial control systems, causing physical damage to Iranian nuclear centrifuges while hiding its presence from system administrators. The weapon represented a convergence of deep technical knowledge, operational intelligence, and strategic planning that could only have been developed by nation-state actors with substantial resources. The implications of Stuxnet extended far beyond its immediate target. The malware proved that cyber weapons could cross the boundary from digital networks into physical systems, causing real-world damage comparable to conventional sabotage. Industrial control systems that operated everything from power plants to water treatment facilities were revealed to be vulnerable to attacks that could cause catastrophic failures, with devastating consequences for civilian populations. The sophistication of classified cyber warfare capabilities likely extends far beyond what has been publicly revealed. Advanced persistent threat actors, widely believed to be state-sponsored groups, have demonstrated abilities to maintain access to target networks for years without detection. Zero-day exploits attacks that target previously unknown software vulnerabilities can penetrate even the most heavily defended systems. And supply chain attacks can compromise hardware or software before it reaches its intended users. The psychological warfare aspects of cyber operations represent another dimension of digital conflict that operates in the shadows of classification. Information operations can manipulate public opinion through coordinated disinformation campaigns. Social media manipulation can amplify divisive content to destabilize target societies. And deepfake technologies can create convincing but fabricated evidence of events that never occurred. The defensive challenges posed by advanced cyber threats require capabilities that mirror the sophistication of the weapons they're designed to counter. Artificial intelligence systems can analyze network traffic patterns to identify subtle indicators of malicious activity. Machine learning algorithms can adapt to new attack techniques faster than human analysts could respond. And automated response systems can isolate compromised systems and deploy countermeasures without waiting for human authorization. But the same technologies that enable advanced cyber defense can also be turned toward offensive purposes. Artificial intelligence can optimize attack strategies to exploit specific vulnerabilities in target systems. Machine learning can analyze defensive responses to develop more effective evasion techniques. And autonomous cyber weapons can operate independently, making attack decisions based on programmed parameters without direct human control. The attribution challenges in cyber warfare create unique strategic complications that don't exist in conventional conflict. Sophisticated attackers can mask their activities behind layers of misdirection, making it difficult to determine the true source of an attack. False flag operations can implicate innocent parties, creating diplomatic complications that serve the attacker's strategic objectives. And the technical complexity of advanced cyber weapons makes forensic analysis extremely challenging, even for the most sophisticated investigators. The economic implications of cyber warfare extend far beyond direct damage to targeted systems. Intellectual property theft can transfer decades of research and development to competitors within hours. Financial system attacks can disrupt global commerce in ways that affect millions of people who never knew they were targets. And critical infrastructure attacks can cause cascading failures that paralyze entire regions for extended periods. The legal and ethical frameworks governing cyber warfare remain poorly defined, creating grey areas that state and non-state actors exploit for strategic advantage. Traditional concepts of proportionality and civilian protection become complicated when cyber attacks can affect both military and civilian systems simultaneously. The difficulty of predicting collateral damage from cyber weapons makes it challenging to assess whether specific attacks comply with international humanitarian law. Surveillance capabilities developed for cyber warfare purposes have created unprecedented abilities to monitor digital communications and activities. Deep packet inspection can analyze the content of internet traffic in real time. Metadata analysis can reveal social networks and behavioral patterns without accessing message content. And persistent monitoring systems can track individuals across multiple platforms and devices, creating comprehensive profiles of their activities and associations. The convergence of cyber warfare with other emerging technologies creates possibilities that extend far beyond traditional computer network operations. Internet of Things devices can be weaponized to create massive distributed attack networks. artificial intelligence systems can be compromised to make incorrect decisions with potentially catastrophic consequences. And quantum computing threatens to render current encryption methods obsolete, fundamentally altering the landscape of digital security. The invisible nature of cyber warfare makes it particularly suited to the secretive world of black projects. Operations can be conducted with complete deniability, leaving target organizations uncertain about whether they've been attacked or simply experienced technical failures. The low cost and high impact potential of cyber weapons make them attractive alternatives to conventional military capabilities. And the global reach of internet infrastructure means that targets anywhere in the world can be reached instantly from secure facilities thousands of miles away. Current cyber warfare capabilities likely include technologies that would seem like science fiction to observers familiar only with publicly acknowledged tools. The digital battlefield represents a domain where the rules of engagement are still being written and the weapons of tomorrow are being developed in the shadows of today's black projects. As our dependence on digital infrastructure continues to grow, the importance of these invisible warriors and their secret cyber weapons will only increase, making the outcomes of battles fought in cyberspace as consequential as any conflict waged with conventional arms. Chapter 14: The Economics of Secrecy. Walk through the halls of the Pentagon on any given day, and you'll encounter budget analysts poring over spreadsheets that contain some of the largest numbers in human history. Defense spending measured in hundreds of billions of dollars flows through procurement offices, research divisions, and operational commands. But hidden within these massive allocations are line items that tell a different story. Projects with innocuous names like Special Activities or Advanced Concept Technology Demonstrations that conceal programs whose true costs and capabilities remain unknown to all but a handful of cleared CLEST personnel. This is the hidden economy of black projects, where money flows through channels so classified that even senior defense officials may not know where it goes or what it purchases. The financial architecture supporting these programs represents one of the most sophisticated accounting systems ever devised, designed not for efficiency or transparency, but for absolute secrecy and complete deniability. The legal foundation for unacknowledged funding traces back to the National Security Act of 1947, which created mechanisms for financing intelligence activities without public disclosure. Special Access Programs, or SAPs, were established as vehicles for conducting research and operations too sensitive for normal oversight. These programs operate under authorities that allow them to bypass standard procurement regulations, accounting requirements, and congressional review processes that govern conventional defense spending. The funding mechanisms for black projects operate through multiple layers of financial obfuscation that make it nearly impossible to trace money from its congressional appropriation to its ultimate use. Funds may be allocated to conventional programs, then quietly transferred to classified activities through administrative procedures that leave no documentary trail. Defense contractors may receive payments for legitimate work that actually subsidize entirely different classified projects. And research institutions may conduct studies funded through grants that appear to support basic science, but actually advance specific military applications. The scale of black project funding defies easy comprehension. Conservative estimates suggest that tens of billions of dollars annually flow through unacknowledged programs, though the true figure could be substantially higher. Some individual black projects have consumed more money than the gross domestic product of small nations, often over periods spanning decades. The B-2 Spirit Bomber program, one of the few black projects whose costs have been partially disclosed, ultimately exceeded $130 billion, including development and production expenses. But the B-2 represents only the tip of the financial iceberg. Programs that remain completely classified may dwarf even these extraordinary expenditures. The development costs for truly revolutionary technologies, those that challenge fundamental scientific understanding, can require investments that stretch across multiple decades and involve thousands of highly specialized personnel. When the goal is achieving capabilities that seem impossible, normal considerations of cost-effectiveness become secondary to strategic necessity. The relationship between government agencies and defense contractors in black project funding creates a symbiotic ecosystem that operates largely outside normal market forces. Companies that participate in classified programs often develop capabilities and expertise that have no civilian application. Their business models become dependent on continued classified work, creating incentives to propose increasingly ambitious projects that require ever larger investments. The result is a specialized industrial base that exists primarily to serve programs that officially don't exist. Competition in the black project world operates under rules that would be unrecognizable in civilian markets. Contractors bid on programs whose requirements they may not fully understand, using cost estimates based on technologies that may not yet exist. Selection criteria emphasize security clearances and compartmentalized expertise over traditional measures of efficiency or innovation. And contract performance is evaluated by officials who may themselves be unaware of the project's ultimate objectives or strategic context. The workforce supporting black projects represents another hidden economic sector with characteristics unlike any conventional industry. Personnel require security clearances that can take years to obtain and maintain. Their specialized knowledge often has no application outside classified programs, creating career paths that are essentially invisible to the broader economy. Salaries and benefits must be competitive enough to attract top talent while maintaining the secrecy necessary to protect program integrity. The geographical concentration of black project work creates regional economies that depend heavily on classified spending. Areas around major defense installations often support networks of specialized contractors, consultants, and service providers whose business models are built around unacknowledged programs. Local real estate markets, educational institutions, and service industries develop characteristics that reflect the presence of highly paid workers engaged in activities they cannot discuss publicly. The technological spillover effects from black project investments create economic value that extends far beyond their immediate military applications. Research conducted for classified programs often leads to innovations that eventually find civilian uses, though the connection may not be apparent for decades. The Internet, GPS navigation, stealth materials, and advanced composites all trace their origins to military research programs that were once highly classified. The economic impact of these technologies ultimately dwarfs their original development costs, though the benefits accrue to the broader economy rather than the programs that created them. But the secrecy required for black project funding also creates inefficiencies that would be intolerable in competitive markets. Duplicate research may be conducted by different programs that are unaware of each other's existence. Promising technologies may be abandoned due to classification restrictions that prevent collaboration between related projects. And the lack of external oversight can allow programs to continue long past the point where their strategic value justifies their continued expense. The opportunity costs of black project spending represent perhaps the most significant hidden economic impact of these programs. Resources devoted to classified research are unavailable for other defense priorities or civilian investments. The highly specialized personnel working on black projects might otherwise contribute to commercial technology development or basic scientific research. The industrial capacity dedicated to classified production could potentially serve broader economic needs. International implications of black project economics extend beyond simple military competition. Nations that invest heavily in classified research gain technological advantages that can translate into economic dominance in emerging industries. The country that first develops practical quantum computing, room temperature superconductors, or artificial general intelligence through classified programs could achieve decisive advantages in both military and economic spheres. This dynamic creates pressure for sustained investment in speculative technologies regardless of their immediate practical applications. The financial audit challenges posed by black project spending create accountability gaps that would be considered scandalous in any other context. Programs that consume billions of dollars may never be subject to independent financial review. Cost overruns that would trigger congressional investigations in conventional programs may go undetected or unreported in classified contexts. And the personnel responsible for financial oversight may lack the technical expertise necessary to evaluate whether spending levels are justified by program progress. Congressional oversight of black project funding operates through mechanisms designed to provide accountability while maintaining necessary secrecy. Small groups of senior legislators receive briefings on classified programs, but they may be prohibited from discussing their findings with colleagues or staff members. Budget allocations for black projects are often buried within larger defense appropriations, making it difficult for even cleared legislators to track specific program costs. The challenge for program managers is maintaining the secrecy necessary to protect revolutionary technologies while demonstrating sufficient value to justify continued investment. Some programs may be forced to reveal more about their objectives and progress to secure adequate funding. Others may need to find new funding mechanisms that operate outside traditional defense budgets. And the most sensitive programs may require international cost-sharing arrangements that spread expenses across allied nations while maintaining necessary security restrictions. The hidden economy that supports black projects represents one of the most extraordinary financial phenomena in modern history. Tens of billions of dollars flow annually through systems designed to leave no trace, supporting technologies that may reshape human civilization while remaining completely invisible to public scrutiny. Whether this investment represents the price of freedom or the cost of secrecy itself may depend on discoveries that remain locked away in the classified world, waiting for the day when their true value can finally be revealed. Chapter 15. Tomorrow's Secrets Today. Stand at the edge of the Nevada desert tonight, looking across the vast expanse toward the restricted airspace above Groom Lake. The sky appears empty, painted with stars that have watched over this landscape for millennia. But somewhere in that darkness, at altitudes and speeds that challenge detection, tomorrow's impossible technologies may already be taking their first tentative flights. Aircraft that won't be acknowledged for decades, propulsion systems that operate on principles we barely understand, and capabilities that will reshape warfare transportation, and perhaps human civilization itself. This is the eternal cycle of black project development. What seems impossible today becomes routine tomorrow, following a pattern established over 7 decades of secret research and development. The technologies that astound us when they're finally revealed were once experimental prototypes, tested in complete secrecy while the public remained unaware that such capabilities were even theoretically possible. Hypersonic flight represents one frontier where classified development almost certainly exceeds public knowledge. While civilian researchers struggle to achieve sustained speeds above Mach 5, military programs likely operate vehicles capable of Mach 10 or higher. These aircraft would cross continents in minutes, strike any target on Earth within hours of launch, and remain effectively invulnerable to current defensive systems. The engineering challenges are staggering, but the strategic advantages justify investments measured in tens of billions of dollars. The materials science required for practical hypersonic flight pushes beyond anything commercially available. Aircraft surfaces must withstand temperatures that would melt conventional metals while maintaining structural integrity under aerodynamic forces that could tear apart normal airframes. Propulsion systems must operate efficiently across speed ranges from takeoff to hypersonic cruise, and thermal management systems must prevent onboard equipment from being destroyed by the heat generated by atmospheric friction. Space-based weapons systems represent another area where classified capabilities likely far exceed public acknowledgement. The ability to strike terrestrial targets from orbital platforms would provide unprecedented strategic advantages. Kinetic weapons deployed from space could deliver conventional explosive effects without using nuclear materials. Directed energy systems operating above the atmosphere could engage targets anywhere on Earth without atmospheric interference, and the deployment of such systems could be conducted with complete secrecy until the moment they become operational. Artificial intelligence applications in military systems probably represent the most revolutionary frontier currently under development. Machine learning algorithms can process sensor data faster than human operators, identify targets with superhuman accuracy, and coordinate complex operations without direct human control. But the most advanced AI systems being developed in classified programs likely possess capabilities that would astound even experts familiar with cutting-edge civilian research. Autonomous weapons systems, guided by advanced artificial intelligence, could operate independently for extended periods, making tactical decisions based on programmed objectives while adapting to changing battlefield conditions. Swarm technologies could coordinate thousands of individual units in attacks that overwhelm defensive systems through sheer numbers and unpredictable behavior patterns. And machine learning systems could analyze enemy capabilities and develop countermeasures faster than human strategists could respond to changing threats. The quantum technology revolution promises capabilities that seem almost magical to observers familiar only with conventional physics. Quantum computers could break encryption systems that protect everything from financial transactions to military communications. Quantum sensors could detect objects through methods that make traditional stealth technology obsolete. And quantum communication systems could provide absolutely secure channels that cannot be intercepted or jammed using any known technique. Military applications of quantum technology extend far beyond improved computing and communication. Quantum radar systems could detect stealth aircraft by analyzing quantum entanglement effects rather than conventional electromagnetic reflection. Quantum navigation systems could provide precise positioning without relying on vulnerable satellite networks. And quantum cryptography could protect military communications using physical laws rather than mathematical algorithms. Biotechnology integration with military systems opens possibilities that blur the boundaries between human and machine capabilities. Neural interfaces could allow direct mental control of weapons systems, vehicles, and communication networks. Genetic modifications could enhance human performance beyond natural limits while providing resistance to biological weapons. And synthetic biology could create entirely artificial organisms designed for specific military or intelligence applications. The convergence of multiple revolutionary technologies creates possibilities that exceed the sum of their individual capabilities. AI-controlled hypersonic vehicles could strike targets with unprecedented speed and precision. Quantum encrypted communication networks could coordinate global operations with perfect security. And biotechnology-enhanced operators could interface directly with advanced weapon systems through neural connections that bypass traditional control interfaces. But perhaps the most significant development occurring in today's black projects is the integration of these technologies into systems that challenge fundamental assumptions about the nature of warfare itself. Conflicts could be conducted entirely through cyber attacks that cripple enemy infrastructure without conventional military engagement. Swarms of autonomous weapons could engage and defeat human-controlled forces through coordination and decision-making capabilities that exceed human limitations. And space-based systems could project power globally while remaining effectively invulnerable to terrestrial defensive measures. The secrecy requirements for these advanced technologies exceed anything attempted in previous black projects. The strategic advantages they provide are so overwhelming that even acknowledging their existence could trigger international responses that eliminate their effectiveness. The technical principles they employ are so advanced that revelation could accelerate enemy research programs by decades. And the applications they enable are so revolutionary that public awareness could generate political opposition that terminates promising research. Current sightings of unusual aerial phenomena may represent glimpses of these future technologies during their classified testing phases, objects that accelerate instantly without apparent propulsion, aircraft that change direction at angles that would be fatal to human pilots, and vehicles that demonstrate flight characteristics that defy conventional understanding of aerodynamics and physics. These observations, dismissed by skeptics as misidentification or hoax, might actually be legitimate encounters with technologies that won't be acknowledged for decades. The pattern established by previous Black Project revelations suggests that today's impossible sightings could become tomorrow's routine capabilities. The angular stealth fighters that seemed alien in the 1970s became conventional military aircraft in the 1990s. The hypersonic reconnaissance planes that defied explanation in the 1960s were acknowledged as technological marvels decades later, and the technologies that seem impossible today may become standard military equipment in the 2040s or 2050s. International competition in advanced technology development creates pressures that drive continued investment in speculative research programs. Nations that achieve breakthroughs in quantum computing, artificial intelligence, or hypersonic flight could gain decisive advantages that reshape global power structures. The country that first develops practical room temperature superconductors, controllable fusion power, or artificial general intelligence could dominate both military and economic competition for generations. The future of Black project development will likely be shaped by the same pressures that have driven these programs since their inception. The pursuit of decisive military advantages will continue to justify enormous investments in speculative technologies. The need for absolute secrecy will require increasingly sophisticated security measures as global surveillance capabilities expand. And the competition between nations will accelerate the pace of research into capabilities that challenge the boundaries of scientific possibility. As we conclude our exploration of Black projects and Area 51, the fundamental mystery remains intact. Somewhere in the Nevada desert, protected by fences, guards, and classification systems that have kept secrets for over 70 years, tomorrow's impossibilities are becoming today's realities. The cycle continues, driven by the same forces that have propelled human technological development since our species first learned to shape tools from stone. And so, the lights continue to move across the Nevada sky, carrying secrets that may not be revealed for decades to come. Thank you for joining us in the hidden world, where tomorrow's technology takes its first flight.